Welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to helping the investment banking community grow through learning from successful leaders. So whether you're interested in learning about investment banking, or you're an analyst or associate looking for advice on career progression and succeeding in the industry, or a VP or senior that's passionate about leadership, you'll take away something from each and every episode. My name is Pete Nieberg, Global Head at Outram, and my mission is to connect as many of you with successful investment banking leaders as possible. So thanks for joining me and enjoy today's episode. So I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Rusty Ray, Managing Partner at Alantra in New York. Rusty has over 20 years experience in the investment banking industry with a deep understanding of biosciences, healthcare, life sciences, pharma, medical devices, and more. He started his career at Brocair Partners, leading M&A, recaps, and private placements, before taking roles at 11T Partners and Crosstree Capital. He's also a long-standing board member of Apricus Biosciences for 9 years, overseeing the Celios Therapeutics reverse merger, before joining Alantra in 2019. Rusty's advised on many successful transactions. He cares a lot about helping others grow and develop, not to mention he's a top guy. So it's a perfect choice to join us today. So welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, Rusty, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Peter.
Thanks. Let's start with maybe you introducing Alantra and what you do for your clients to our listeners.
Sure. So Alantra is a global firm. We've been around for a number of years. The firm started in Spain and is much more mature in Europe. So the U.S. is a relatively new foray for the business, and I'm excited to be part of that. In Europe, we have offices in all the major economies, 25 in total, about 600 people. And in the U.S., we do have offices in Boston, New York, and San Francisco, and growing fast. It's been exciting because we were brought in to lead the healthcare efforts in the U.S., which has really balanced out a lot of the healthcare capabilities in Europe. So really exciting time to be here.
Nice growth phase. It must be exciting. So thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm always interested speaking to successful leaders in the industry with 20 years experience. And it always intrigues me to know, how did you end up in investment banking?
Probably by accident. I've always had an interest in life sciences. My degrees have been in the sciences. I thought for a long time after universities I would go into research, and I realized that was not for me. Thought about how people sort of build businesses around science and was really intrigued by that. Spent a number of years in public policy and then eventually made my way into banking. Kind of clicked for me because the hard part of banking within healthcare to me is always been the science. It's always been the vocabulary, making sure that you understand the business that you're working with. The banking and the finance came relatively easy. That's something that can be learned over time. Obviously, as you get more experience in transactions, it becomes easier. But it's always the science that is the hardest part to train new folks, younger people coming into the space and trying to help them understand the pathway of drug discovery and the many, many different branches off of that and what that means and how that impacts, how businesses can grow and be shaped and be financed and be bought. So, always try to find people with a grounding in sciences to the extent that we can. And, it's because of that, that we've had some good success, being able to talk to our clients at their level. Not a PhD, won't pretend to be one, but, have built enough experience and vocabulary to be able to kind of hold our own with scientists and with founders in the industry.
And that's so it seems like that's an important part for attracting talent to Alantra as well. So is that a key part of your recruitment process to really look for the candidates that have that science? And is there a way you can help grow that, or are you really focusing on the finance side and looking for that skill ahead of hiring?
Gosh, I think the first thing we look at is, are they good people? We have kind of a no jerks policy, which I think we've upheld. Yeah. We are trying to grow the team aggressively in the U.S. We have a number of potential candidates for additional managing partner positions. outside of life sciences, more in traditional healthcare services, healthcare IT, et cetera. So it's, kind of an exciting time. But I think for me, culture's first. We want to make sure that we have a good, respectful culture, a culture that, people feel like they can enter and grow. And so far, we've been successful at that. Everyone's kind of moved up. We have a lot of people that, feel comfortable here and I think want to see their careers through, to the next phase. So that's really rewarding that, you can build people up and as they move on, because they always do, you have good relationships and contacts throughout the industry. But I would say the kids coming out of university today or business school are uber smart, smarter than I ever was, more capable than I ever could have been, and just seem more savvy. So, again, we're kind of really focused on the people skills and, the willingness to learn, to be curious, to ask questions, and, really be engaging, not to come in with the attitude, well, I know how to do this, or I know what I know, and that's enough. It's, you got to stretch yourself and be willing to kind of, want to grow and want to learn. And I think that's such an important criteria. The rest of the stuff, people get over time, whether it's in the life sciences or in healthcare services, people learn it and they learn it very well and very quickly. These are smart individuals coming out of schools, or even in mid-career. But it's the people stuff that we find most important, that really is an indicator of someone's
I
success or
love your
not.
insight, and that smarter coming out of university, more access to information. I can certainly relate to that as well. Let's talk a bit about culture and deeper then. So you talked about a no jerk policy. How do you foster the culture once you have the analysts in? What's your tactics that you use there to really develop the culture you're looking for?
Gosh, I would say a key component of that is just being open, trying to be as flat as one can possibly be, in terms of an organizational hierarchy. Obviously, we all have our roles. Um, and, you know, we're not expecting an analyst to go out and generate business or interface with a client right away. We want to build them up to that, but we don't want to dissuade them of taking risks. Putting them in a position to say, okay, how do you think about something, or can you deliver, a deck or some materials on XYZ topic. um, you know Start yourself and see how far you get, and then come ask for help, and let's discuss it, and try to really build up some confidence. The other thing I think we do that I know a lot of other firms don't do is we try to get them engaged early on with clients, have them face clients. I'm not suggesting that they're going to lead a pitch or, lead a negotiation around a purchase agreement, but be part of that conversation, taking notes, being diligent, being aware, learning how we interface with clients, and they take that, absorb it, and take it away, and can use that later in their careers. And just having that opportunity, I think, has been tremendous in terms of growth for some of the younger folks. I mean, they often say to us that, wow, we don't get to travel, we don't get to go to client sites, but there's no better method of learning than actually being there. Yeah, unfortunately, it probably is pretty boring just sitting there taking notes, but at the same time, it's a pretty good education, because at the end of the day, this business isn't about spreadsheets and PowerPoints. It's about people and understanding how we deal with people. Sometimes they're quite difficult. How do we manage them? How do we work with them and get to a place that we all find an acceptable solution? So, seeing that firsthand, that I think is helpful, and has enabled a number of our younger folks to grow.
I can connect with that, and I think learning and being there in person helps so much to gather that information. And after COVID, now being back in person more and more, it's really important. And if they've got the growth mindset that you mentioned, that's key to the recruitment process, then I'm sure they're flourishing.
Well, we have a bit of a funny story about COVID. We never required anyone to be back sort of in the height of COVID by any stretch. But as things started to wane, and companies were making decisions about, are we in office, are we out office, what is our hybrid policy? we took a poll and said, who wants to be here all the time? Who wants to still work from home? What's sort of the vibe in the room? And definitely had a few of the junior sort of mid-level folks that said, hey, I'd like to work from home, a couple days a week. No issue. You'll get your work done. We trust you. You're an adult. We'll manage it. It's no problem. And that seems to be what our peers are doing. So we want to be in line there and make sure that people are generally happy. That lasted about a week. The next Monday, everyone was back. And they just said, we like it here. We like the culture. We like the people. We like the engagement. And I like to think that that's kind of part of the culture that we built and part of the learning experience that, people actually want to be here as opposed to working from home. That was kind of a fun testament.
Yeah, a testament to the work you're obviously doing on culture. And I think, again, with the growth mindset, being around those that you can learn from and is key to growing quickly and being successful in the industry. So appreciate that. I mean, what about the change in IBD culture? You've been in the industry a long time. How has it changed over the years and over your career?
Gosh, I think there are certain firms that have not changed. There are certain people that have not changed. I see behaviors of people that I've known for quite some time that, I think, gosh, I never want to work with or around that person. It's a fairly harsh tone. I understand we all work in a pretty high pressure environment and, clients can be demanding and, there are real deadlines with real consequences. But at the same time, I don't think we should ever let that override kind of our good sense of just treating people fairly, trying to make sure that people have workloads that are manageable, really very much against busy work. We don't do pitches for pitches sake. We don't do decks for deck's sake. I mean, we want to make sure that the work we're doing is meaningful and impactful. And I think that kind of relates back to time. It's if we manage ourselves well and we're focused on the work that needs to be done. Yes, of course, we have to work late hours sometimes, but I think that you can strike a balance in your sort of work-life portfolio that you don't need to be here, till 3 o'clock in the morning every single day. That's just not a culture we want to build. I think that's changing. I know it still exists in some firms. I hear it from peers, but that to me is something that's kind of been a more holistic change. The other change that I think I'm seeing, although I'd like to see it faster, is that, I'd like to see more and more women further up the chain. I have a number of peers that, went to school with that are very successful. And so that's good to see. But, I still like to see more and more kind of mid-level women in the space, in the industry that have the opportunity to get to the top. I think that's still lacking, but it's getting better, but it's still lacking.
Yeah, improving, but a long way to go for sure. And I agree. Is there any other parts of IBD culture you'd most like to see change as well, giving it some thought?
Culture that I'd like to see change. I think Alantra has done a really good job of addressing competitiveness within a firm. And I don't mean kind of good spirit competitiveness, which is great. And, I want to work with my partners and other managing directors and, be able to brag a bit. And, we want to push each other, to be successful. And that should always exist because it's fun and, it's collegial. The attitudes that I don't like are kind of the, putting a fence around certain relationships or industries or conversations to the point where it becomes detrimental. And we still see this all the time where, I've talked to folks in Europe at larger firms that have U.S. presence, and I talk about Alantra and how I work with my European colleagues frequently and really even proactively to try to push opportunities in Europe because we're so strong there. And I hear more times than not from very well-known firms, from a healthcare banker in Germany that says, I never talk to my counterpart in New York. I think that's strange. I think that's a bad culture. I think everybody loses in the end. I mean, obviously they're still successful at getting deals done, but if you just thought about what if the communication and what if the collaboration were a bit stronger between offices or even between people within an office, what could you do? Um, I like to think we're getting there and we're being successful because of that. And eventually, that model will win out. But there's always going to be people that don't like to share, because at the end of the day, there's a fee involved, and you have to think about that and think about how we treat people fairly in that scenario. But you want to incentivize people to do that, and I think that's something that still needs to change.
I love that insight, and having a global remit myself and being able to work across and share information and communicate well is key to our success as well. So I can definitely see that. I mean, those that are already in leadership positions that, are interested in what you've said there and maybe want to foster more of that within their teams and their business, any tips as to how, you've been able to achieve that success in the cross-border conversations?
I guess I would say take a risk, take a personal risk. Go out there and talk to your colleagues, get to know them on a personal level, get on a plane and travel. Yeah, there were a number of years where we didn't do that, and we all became a little complacent. But getting to know people definitely breaks the ice. It's harder to treat someone, at arm's length that you know well, that you've had a dinner with, or think highly of. So I'd say that's number one. Number two is, I tend to think that the world balances out. Call it karma, call it whatever you want, but you do a good deed, and maybe you don't get a quid pro quo, immediately. But in the end, it does work out. Relationships have a way of finding themselves coming back to you. People remember good conversations. They remember help. They remember introductions, and you know, you have to be a little bit trusting. But if you kind of offer that up to your colleagues and peers, I've found that, after, it takes a little bit of time to sort of get people in that mindset, but after a while, things start to come back to you. And then all of a sudden you find yourself like you're really collaborating and you're getting yourselves in positions for opportunities that I could not have done by myself. And it'll take time, and people look at it kind of from a cost perspective, and yes, it costs, meaning you've got to give up some connections and relationships and be a little bit open, and not everyone always behaves appropriately, but most people do, and I think people remember that, and it does have a way of coming back to you. So you just kind of got to put yourself out there, I guess I would say.
Yeah, a leader on the podcast recently shared the importance of networking. He actually shared that if he went back to the start of his career, one of the things he would tell himself is to network more. What's your take on that?
Oh my gosh, I preach that every day to our junior people. I tell them, for when they get here, I mean, we have a pretty open plan office, and there are people from other teams, in and around. And I really push, junior and mid-level people to say, you got to get to know these guys in other verticals. You may not have a lot in common with them on a deal side, but make sure you're going out for a beer, make sure you're helping, make sure you're being thoughtful and trying to just build a relationship, because 5 years from now, when they're at bank X or private equity firm Y, they are your network, and that is beyond valuable. And having that network is critical, and building those networks is that's the future of your career. So start early, be open, and continue to do that. So yeah, it's sometimes hard to sort of put yourself out there and be social in that perspective, but it does pay back, because it starts to compound. All of a sudden you realize your network is quite large, and it becomes very important, especially to your career and being successful.
Nice. And any particular events that you recommend, industry events, those listening who want to put themselves out there a bit more, anything you can recommend?
Gosh, I mean, within healthcare, there's all kinds of specialist industry events for sure. So if you're interested in a particular area, whether it's, let's call it pharma services, there's a number of pharma services events that either focus on contract research, contract manufacturing, and the like, and you can find those. And those are great industry events to get up to speed. I would say the one event that I've gone to for the last, I think, 25 years, that, you know, I question every single year if I'm going to go back, but end up going, is the JP Morgan healthcare event. I mean, it's just such a fun time. You know, always raining, it seems, but you know, you pack some good shoes and you see lots of old friends. You see lots of people that you've transacted with or know all in one place, and it's just a great way to start the year. And you know, people are available. You know, having those 10-15 minute conversation in a hallway of a hotel. It kind of sets up the year, and I think really does expand your network quite quickly. So I would say that's one I really key on for sure.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing. And we'll pop some stuff into the show notes for those listening as well. We'll connect after this and make sure we've got a good list there. In terms of networking, I think it kind of leads nicely into mentorship. I've heard lots of different types of mentorship, from very little to a lot. What's your take on mentorship and how important it is for being successful in the industry?
I think it is important. I don't know if I'm a good mentor or not. I mean, it's the jury's still out. I try to be. I try to do all the. I try to make sure people are aware of the things I wish I'd done or done differently, and think about that and how they might want to choose their career. I think being supportive in people's choices, making sure as they kind of move up the ladder, think about investment banking and try to build some expertise and speciality around the space. I think that's becoming just more and more important, especially within healthcare. It's hard to be sort of a generalist and talk about payers, providers one day, and then talk about new drug development and molecules the next. That's difficult to manage, and it's hard to be credible doing that. So try to foster an environment where people can kind of early on kind of sample across different sub verticals, but then if they think like, wow, I really like pharmaceutical products and I like the discovery process. Okay, let's foster that. Let's figure out what do you need to learn. Are there opportunities to learn more by going back to school, or certain conferences or certain events or certain opportunities to engage with companies to learn more about that. So that's kind of one side of the mentoring angle. The other is, I think I've already mentioned, is around, building out a network. And, the third leg of the stool, I think, is just being available to people earlier in their careers to ask questions. They're really excited to be here and they want to do a good job. And, being open with kind of advice, and it doesn't have to be telling them. It's let them kind of foster questions and ask questions about how would you handle the X situation, or I know we did Y in this situation. Why did we choose that pathway? Or were there alternatives that were considered? We suggested a client do A, B, and C. What was behind that reasoning? So sort of allowing people to feel comfortable to ask those questions without kind of penalty, like, hey, you should already know that. What do you mean? Of course, that's obvious. Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes just dealing with an individual, which is kind of what it comes down to, takes 20 years of experience and just kind of a gut feel. And you're like, well, it's because I screwed up last time. I knew what to do this time. And, passing on those kinds of nuggets, if you will, I find to be an important part of the process. It's not something that can be learned just by being told. They'll have to experience it themselves, but at least maybe they have some guideposts of what not to do in the future from my own mistakes.
It goes back to that growth mindset again for me, and asking questions. I'm always excited when the team's asking questions, even if they may think it's a silly one, because ultimately that's about improving and growing and doing things quicker and learning from those around you. And do you think, you shared that the team are in the office very frequently, has the remote work caused any challenges there that you've seen?
It really hasn't. It was wild those first few months. I can admit that I was 100% wrong about the first few months of COVID. I thought, gosh, the year's going to be terrible. The world is ending. What are we going to do next? It ended up being our best couple of years ever. And it was all remote. I remember we were in the midst of a deal when COVID hit. We were just getting to management meetings, and we did them remotely. And I don't know. I think I've never been so nervous in my life. Like, what's this going to be like? We're not all in the same room. Like, how's the vibe? And it worked. People adapted really quickly, got things done, and it was more efficient. I guess the one bad thing about remote is you're never turned off. And I do remind people that they do need to kind of switch off. You can answer email, you can do Teams calls from 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight, and people won't stop unless you sort of set some boundaries. Now, of course, sometimes it's important to do early meetings and late meetings, and we all have to do those, but it can happen every day. And so you got to be mindful about that. But in terms of just kind of working together, it's been okay. I think, initially people were very good about it and excited about it, and kind of muddled through, and it was successful. I would say as we went on longer, I did feel like remote work is harder. That people were missing those in between conversations. Like, you're talking to someone, and instead of someone kind of hearing it, they're remote, they're not. So, when you catch up with them, you have to catch up with them on a lot of things, which made it harder. So definitely some efficiencies fell off, but overall it's been okay. But like I said, we're all back now, and everybody's happy with that.
So just to sit on that always being on, I think the more experienced you get, you naturally get better in that area, in managing that area. And we touched before on how demanding the investment banking industry is, and that's not going to change. So have you got advice for those analysts, associates, even VPs listening today on how to set better boundaries or leave work at a certain time and really focus on them?
Well, I guess first and foremost thing is get your work done. You don't want to be that person that leaves work and it's like, well, why isn't this done? I would say, in terms of face time and time at the office, if you're spending an inordinate amount of time doing something, you need help, right? It's maybe it's not something you're familiar with. So ask your peers. If you're afraid about asking someone, that's you're reporting to, because it's something you quote unquote should know, ask your peers for help and get advice. Because if you're spending a lot of time doing something, you kind of are probably going down a wrong path because maybe you don't have the tools to do it, and that can be corrected and make you more efficient and just make you better. B, you might end up doing it wrong, which nobody wants, and that is a time waster. So don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that does condense your workday tremendously if you have the right tools and you kind of you know how to operate. Going home, I mean, look, different managers are going to behave differently. We've all worked in and around people that send a text at 1 o'clock in the morning, when you're asleep, and then get angry at you the next day for not answering. Not one of those kinds of people. But, you just kind of got to, I think for junior people, know your audience, within reasonableness, try to prioritize things, when you go home to have dinner and, be with your friends and family on the weekend, provided there's no deadline, make sure, just to kind of manage those emails. Don't feel a need to answer everything immediately, and try to prioritize things so you can have a sane life. Because if you're coming back Monday morning and you're, frazzled because, you've been, answering BS emails all weekend that really didn't need priority, you're just not going to be productive that week anyway. So it's, it probably takes a little bit of pushing back and finding a balance, which I know is harder for younger people to do because, their boss might be demanding something, but you do find that line that you can sort of tread, so that, you can have a same work-life balance.
Perfect. Yeah. I burnt up the pad a little bit there. Ask for help, get it right first time, prioritize, take some time for yourself. I think these are all really important lessons. And as I say, You find it easier the higher you get in terms of how to manage those things. What things do you do, Rusty, on the personal side to relax from the demands of the industry?
I don't do any of the things I just said, so I am a total hypocrite when it comes to that. I do probably answer email too frequently and get stressed about the little things, even though I tell everybody don't do that. So practice what you preach might be my first piece of advice to myself. I think starting the day off for me with a good bit of exercise clears the head, something where you can really just, focus on what you're doing and not think about work, or give your time to think about a specific situation and mull it over and kind of, work through an issue or a thought process in your head while you're doing something, pretty simple like running or cycling or something like that. That really helps me kind of get my head in the game for the day or the weekend, and that's kind of what I do for sure. That helps me kind of clear my thought patterns.
I'm a big fan of the morning workout as well. Getting me fired up for the day and taking that time to get the mindset straight is key. And if you want to lead others, I think the key is to have stuff in order yourself as much as possible as well, right? So it's
and have a good peer network.
Yep.
Have people you can talk to. People maybe from other industries or people that have been successful. That are older or wiser or just more accomplished, asking them for advice because they just have a different perspective or different thought pattern that can be very helpful. So don't be afraid to lean on your network.
Perfect. And the podcast mission is to really connect as many of our listeners with successful leaders as possible. So hopefully that will help. I want to chat a bit about deal success. That is the key to being successful in the industry, making good deals. So having closed many successful deals in your career, what do you feel are the keys to having success in that area?
It's a little bit of luck, of course. Sometimes it comes down to some very weird opportunities that create success. Had they gone a different way, would have resulted in a bad outcome. So I don't want to ever ignore that there's a little bit of luck or randomness to any deal sometimes. But I would say the things that have largely enabled us to be successful are: one, don't BS, be transparent, try to find a solution, make sure you're putting yourself in the buyer or seller shoes, your kind of opposition shoes, try to understand what their issues are and why their issues are what they are. I'm not saying we can always accommodate all of them, but at least try to understand why they're asking the question or why they're taking a certain position. It's helpful in formulating your response. But, if you were to talk to our clients or our past clients, and, we say this whenever anyone asks for references, I say, the things you'll hear from people we've worked with are: we are straightforward, we are direct, we, are just overly transparent. And, I've been in a lot of situations where we've picked up the pieces of a broken process where other banks were involved, where, quite frankly, they got the mandate because they overpromised. And I don't understand how or why people do that, because that is a conversation I never want to have with a board, which is, I said you could get $200 million here and the bids are coming in at 120. Like, how does that work? How do you not just look foolish? So, it's being transparent, maybe to the point of being a little harsh sometimes. But I think in the end, people admire that and respect it, and people come back. We've done, 8 transactions for GSK. And I like to think the reason they kept coming back is because we were very direct and honest about, what the expectations would be and the process. And to me, that's what makes success. And a little bit of luck.
I definitely appreciate that sentiment. And in our relationship, I realize that you've been direct, and it's something that I've enjoyed as well. And I think transparency, honesty, avoiding BS, as you put it, or understanding the stakeholders' key issues. Obviously, speak to successful deal making. So, insight's great. What about for someone new to investment banking? What advice would you give them to really support the deals in a way that leads to success?
Gosh, someone that's new, I think support. What I find to be really value add is taking the next step, taking initiative on your own, within reason. And you know, an analyst or a new associate, again, they're not going to be driving the deal from day one. That their roles will grow in it, but they're not going to be responsible for winning the mandate or running the process. They are a support function. But I've always found that the best support function are people that go beyond what is asked. And I don't mean that by work harder. I mean, taking that extra step. Like if, there's a thought process of, okay, we're going to do a certain task. Well, what's the logical next task after that? Or what should we be thinking about 2 or 3 steps ahead? Now, an analyst or an associate may not always know, and they may not have all the right answers on that, but to start taking that initiative to say, okay, we've done this task and which is what you asked me to, but, I think we're going to need this next, and to start to position that. Again, be mindful that you're not wasting time, or that you're not going down a wrong path. So ask for help and be thoughtful about it. But what really makes for a successful team is the folks that almost anticipate, or think about what is the next step in this process that needs to be done or will likely need to be done, and then go ahead and get started and start thinking about it. Because if you start putting those pieces together, it helps the team, just collectively move faster and more efficiently. So that's what I would say really adds value, from a more junior perspective in kind of a deal process.
Seeing that next step and being proactive about it, I can definitely connect with
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, the VPs are the nearest to moving into that managing director role. Any key advice for VPs listening today to succeed and take that step to managing director successfully?
I would say start to build that network, because deals come from relationships. It's very rare that a deal comes in just because someone calls you and says, "Hey, I need an investment banker." It happens, but it's rare. It's usually long-term relationships. So starting to build those relationships, build out that network. I would say start to display competence in sector matter, expertise and the like, and start to have opinions about certain subsectors, and being thoughtful there, so that you're seen as an emerging thought leader. Like, okay, this person understands this space, he understands my business, he understands the buyers and what they're looking for, because I understand the industry. And I think doing those things, put you in a really good position to step into kind of the director, managing director shoes, and start to actually develop business, and and be successful ultimately.
Definitely. I can, again, relate to that. And what about speaking to other leaders? What I've heard quite a bit is that the toughest transition in investment banking is from analyst to associate. And it's a hard transition, usually because of the people nature, the management nature that's involved. First of all, do you agree with this as being the hardest transition?
Um, don't know. I never really thought about that. I I think from my experience, we probably put more responsibility on analysts sooner, so that it almost feels like a logical next step. I'm not trying to say that we're better than everybody else, but we just default sort of you know try to put more responsibility and more ownership onto younger people earlier, to the extent that they can handle it, and that kind of does bring them along faster. I would say along those lines, the one thing that they don't get as an analyst is kind of that people managing skills. It's hard to teach. It's not something that you can just say, read a book and you'll know how to interact with people. But I like to think, that people before them, are respectful and open, and they see sort of that style, that, we're going to be thoughtful about our work. We're going to be careful about it, and we're going to be mindful of making sure people have the resources and tools to do what they need to do. And if they see that firsthand and they've been treated that way, I like to think that when they take that next step and they are managing a pool of analysts on a deal, then they sort of know how to treat people, and they know what to do. Does take some training. Not everyone gets it right on the first time. Always some interpersonal issues that pop up as people learn. But that's kind of how we've fostered that, is just make sure that they have a good example before stepping into those shoes.
Well, what would you say your leadership style is like? I'm hearing a lot about the culture and including more juniors in deal making and client situations, fostering openness, transparency. What's your leadership style? What else around that would you say is the key to success?
I think, I don't know if it's a style. It's just more of an attitude that I've recognized. I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I rely on lots of voices around me, um, and lots of opinions, and sometimes those opinions can come from a 21 or 22-year-old because they just have a different set of experiences or knowledge. I think the best example would be, as we start to integrate tech more and more into just kind of our daily operations, not necessarily on the deal side, but just how we use tech to enable what we do. I don't know any of this stuff. I'll admit, I successfully use an iPhone, but these kids, they can code, they can do things so much more efficiently. So just recognizing that, hey, this is not a skill set I have, nor do I even want. And, they have it. And, so we should probably be listening to even some of the more junior people as we start to think about business development or strategy or things like that. So I would say that's kind of a cornerstone of my quote unquote style, is trying to absorb a lot of different opinions. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I take them all at the same level, or take them all seriously, or that every single one has an impact on an ultimate decision. But to the extent that I know I don't know something, or can be open to being taught, yeah, I think that's important, and hopefully it leads to a better outcome.
I think maybe that's a good tip for listeners as well, looking to bring their knowledge of technology and bring it into the firm, and helping to make suggestions on the strategy side that can make a big difference. So I think that's a great point. Are there other opportunities that you particularly see that analysts and associates could really capitalize on at the moment to succeed?
Opportunities. Not to kind of keep harping on tech, because maybe it's just an area I'm not as comfortable with. So I see a lot of opportunities there. The integration of different technologies into kind of our workflow, whether it's just client management, faster, better production of materials, different types of outreach with industry leaders. We do a podcast ourselves, and honestly, it's not something I would have ever thought of until some of the people who are more savvy with that kinds of technology and those kinds of communications had said, "Hey, this could be a really interesting way to connect with people," and they were right. So, I think there's some really cool things that folks are doing now that are different from the old way of just, hey, I'm going to go to Boston and meet 20 people and call on these clients. And not that that's not still important, but there are new and different ways that younger people can kind of foster both the generation of content that shows expertise and getting it out into the market, as well as engaging with clients and potential clients. I think a lot of what we've done on those fronts has really come from the analysts and associates because they just know this stuff better. They're smarter at it. They use it every day. They grew up with it. I didn't. So, I think that's a real opportunity for younger folks to leave a mark and say, and come up with creative ideas on how to communicate and what to communicate, that maybe in the past we weren't doing.
Love that. Thanks for sharing, and note for the audience, I think, on that front as well. It's fair to say the investment banking industry is forever changing. It's a fast-paced environment, and the last 12 months we've seen real highs and real lows, particularly in the M&A area. For those more junior in the industry, any advice, or what advice would you give them to be successful in the ever-changing environment they face?
Gosh, I mean, if there's downturns, like we're seeing now where interest rates have risen and, deal making has definitely pulled back, multiples have pulled back in certain subsectors, there's not much you can do as a junior person. I mean, if there are cuts, there are cuts. That's difficult. I would say, this is where your network becomes extremely important. Having built a network, even if you're there for a year or 2 years, and something drastic like that happens, it's that network that's likely going to get you, back to where you want to be. So don't neglect your network. If something happens and, there is a change, in a job role, make sure you're reaching out and do it quickly. Healthcare isn't for everyone, but I guess from my perspective, I've always viewed healthcare as a bit of a safe harbor in the M&A world. I mean, even in the worst of worst times, we seem to see deals getting done. It's definitely a growth sector. And even within healthcare, different subsectors have different cycles, whether it's, if financing is constrained, obviously pharma and biotech and medtech, those kind of maybe take a pause, or it's harder to get deals done. But services, can be robust even during those periods because those generally tend to be larger companies operating with good EBITDA, and their demand for services doesn't really go away. So, even within healthcare, there are ways to kind of play certain environments that can help you continue along a track of success. So while healthcare isn't for everyone, I would say as a younger analyst or an associate, think about, different industry sectors, think about, ones that are growing, and attractive, and, as best you can try to forecast what sectors are going to be attractive and busy, into the future. There are certain subsectors that you could look at now and be like, well, 5 years from now that may no longer exist, or it's going to be greatly diminished. You may like it, but it may not be the right choice for a long-term career.
So great advice for longevity, using the network that's obviously key to building, being resilient when it is tough and some of those tougher challenges happen, and really thinking about the industry and the type of area you want to be in, picking one that's a bit more robust or has a growth opportunity is smart. Thanks for that. That's really interesting, Rusty. I think about your success as a leader. I know you've learned a lot in the role, but what else outside of the role do you feel has really helped you grow and develop as a leader?
Gosh, something that outside of the role that helps. I mean, it's so many things. Not to be too sentimental, but family is really important. There's not a lot more humbling than having kids and watching them get better than you at certain things and watching them grow and teach them. And I learned a lot about engaging with younger people from that, quite honestly, and seeing how you become better at kind of interpersonal relationships. So yeah, that's a key thing for me. I think the other thing outside of work and even outside of network is having a good, strong, friend network relationship, whether that's people you went to school with or grew up with, or, neighbors, um, you know, usually just very different, different fields, different perspectives, just having that, you know, counter point to your daily existence, and you're a bit of an echo chamber around your network. I mean, my network is mostly people in banking or life sciences and things, so we can get together and talk to ourselves that we're all the smartest people in the world and this is how things should be done, etc. And getting the perspective of someone outside of that, that maybe is nowhere near financial services, but you've had a long-term relationship with, and trusting. I think that's very helpful, and that kind of helps you think about leadership in a different way. So having a good, strong kind of personal network, I think, does help in sort of building some of those characteristics that you want to see as you lead
Trusting
your team.
outside voice, and as a dad of two young boys, I certainly connect with your point around family and learning and growth. Hardest job in the world, but certainly the most rewarding, right? In terms of going back to Rusty on his first day in the industry, what advice would you give yourself now, having knowing what you know?
Well, one thing someone asked me this recently. It was a college grad, and he was not looking to go into financial services, but he was just a college grad of a friend, and he asked me. He said, what is the one thing you would say to yourself or to me? And I just said, don't quit, don't give up. Like, things can stink or go the wrong way, but just keep at it. If you do it and you're doing the right basic things, meaning you're a decent person, you're being honest, you're being fair, things may not work out right away, but they will. So don't stop, don't get frustrated and sort of throw up your hands or throw in the towel. Like, keep just trying to push through those things that come up that at the time seem insurmountable or seem really terrible. You know just try to keep going through them, pick yourself up and keep going. That's what I would tell myself and tell anybody who's starting any career, really, because it's too often you can say, oh well, I didn't get this role, or I didn't get this promotion, or this particular event didn't go my way, and it's easy to sort of kind of pout about it. But if you just sort of push through it, don't give up, sometimes you can start to change those outcomes in your direction. But it takes time.
I love that point, and the resilience, and don't give up on yourself or what you want to achieve. So thanks again for sharing that. I want to touch a little bit on recognition, and not so much recognition from clients, but more recognition of the team internally. What do you do at Alantra to really recognize the team?
I would say it's daily. We don't have cupcakes and champagne every day for everyone's basic achievements, but it's every day, reinforcing. If someone's doing a good job, tell them. You know, um, you know, we had a meeting yesterday, and one individual was pretty effective there. Did a good job in preparing for the meeting, and the meeting outcome was good. So we got in the cab to go home, and mention it. Just say, great job today. You did a great job. Don't use it as a time to like criticize and say, oh, this is what we should have done differently. Just be supportive and say, you did a good job. That was great. I like the way you did A, B, and C. Keep at it. And I find doing that, often, when it's required, and when it's warranted. I should say, it's that little thing, because people, can, go for some time, especially if you're a junior person and maybe you don't see the bigger picture of a deal or a deal process, and you think, oh, what's my role here? Like, am I adding value or not? And, I made this suggestion and no one's listening. I mean, that's a tough place to be. So, at least acknowledging that, you hear people, you appreciate their efforts, and they're doing a good job. That goes a long way, because sometimes as a junior person, you think you're just kind of lost in the shuffle. So I try to do it often, and just small little comments, about how people are tracking. I think it works.
I like that approach. In the moment, genuine, calling back to what's gone well. I think they're keys to successful recognition. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. I can't believe we're reaching the end of the show. We only have a few minutes left. So I wanted to start the wrap. For those listening who want to get more of you, Rusty, and connect with Alantra and your mission, how do they best connect with you?
Well, I mean, there's always the LinkedIn possibility. Shoot me a message if anyone wants to connect personally. Alantra.com is our global website. You can always find us. If people are particularly interested in what we have to say about healthcare, we have quite a bit of content within kind of the Alantra healthcare team page. We have a list of our podcasts that have various interviews with senior leaders within the healthcare industry, both in the U.S. and Europe, across a variety of topics. So those are actually pretty fun and pretty short, sort of 5-10 minutes. So definitely digestible. But those are easy ways to connect with us for sure.
Perfect. And we'll pop those again in the show note to make it easy for the listeners. I'm a strong believer that successful leaders are readers, and doesn't have to be books these days, of course, with all the other resources available. Anything you can recommend to the audience that's had an impact on you in your development?
So interesting enough, I've had a book on my bedside table. It's not a very long book. It's a book called The Things They Carried. It's a kind of a first-person account from Vietnam War, an individual who was on the ground there. My daughter read it in high school, and she kept urging me to read it over and over, probably for over a year, saying, "Oh, you got to read this book, you got to read this book." And it was always there. And finally I got to it. And I have to say, it's really been super interesting, really to get a perspective of going through some event like that I could never possibly imagine. The commitment to other people and a team. But that's one I just finished, and I would highly recommend it, and probably has a lot of life lessons, and probably one I might even read again. So there you go.
Perfect. Again, and we'll make sure that gets added for the audience as well. Before we wrap, any final notes from your side? Anything to share? Final shares?
No final shares. Just really appreciate the opportunity to chat. It's been really fun, and glad we've been able to connect. And it's not often you get to sort of talk about these kinds of things in this forum. So good to do, and nice to be able to actually put some thought behind it and think about, okay, this is what we do, this is what works, and this is where we need improvement. So really appreciate the time.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it as well, Rusty, and appreciate how busy you are, so fitting it into your schedule. I'm excited to listen to it back and review the insights. I'm sure there's a lot that the listeners will take away. So thank you so much. Best of luck for those transactions in Q2 and for the future growth of the team over there in the US as well.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining me today for the Investment Banking Leaders podcast. Today's episode was brought to you by Outram, the global leaders in commemorating your most important transactions with a meaningful deal toy. So if you have a successful deal to celebrate, hit me up or the Outram team at outram.com to get your design started. Chatting with Rusty was a great experience. His candid nature made for a really enjoyable conversation, and he shared a ton of really useful insight. I particularly loved his insight that analysts and associates can have a big impact on their firms by utilising their knowledge of technology to drive business development and strategy. Their ability to generate content as well as how to bring it to market and engage with clients can really help everyone succeed faster. His important take that by thinking about what will be required next before being asked helps you get noticed by your seniors and helps deals move quicker and be more successful. He also shared great tips on having a growth mindset and how important it was to be curious, ask questions, and this helps you grow quicker as well as have a better work-life balance. I hope you enjoyed the episode and join me again for the next discussion with another successful investment banking leader. Until then, you can find us where all great podcasts live. Please follow our podcast page, share with those interested, and until next time, best of luck with your transactions.